Smithsonian World's exploration of our unique human experience is made possible by the communications company with the products and services that help us share that experience. Southwestern Bell Corporation. This program is also made possible by the financial support of viewers like you.
As a man is, so he sees.
Man is the animal of mind. A door opens. A garden of light. A timeless human impulse seeks to transform the ordinary. A mind perceives and can see the world outside as separate from itself. Yet who we are seems to color what and how we see. Or does what we see define who we are? Are we the masters of our perceptions?
If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks in his caverns.
William Blake, born in London in 1757, lower middle class. Poet, painter, engraver, composer, prophet.
I have represented it as I saw it. To different people, it appears differently.
No formal education, a life of relative obscurity and poverty. Considered a failure by his family.
Though on earth things seem permanent, they are less permanent than a shadow, as we all know too well.
Blake viewed all life as sacred. He saw the cosmos reflected in the minute and commonplace.
To see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, whole infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour.
Blake was a visionary mystic, and the essence of mystic experience is seeing infinity in everything.
Medical researcher and practicing physician Andrew Weil.
That is, through some internal shift in perception, the external world changes, and a whole realm that was hidden to us previously is suddenly revealed.
To me, this world is all one continued vision of fancy or imagination.
For centuries, the human mind has sought transcendence by looking outward rather than inward. Numerous chemical and biological agents have been used to enhance bodily healing, religious enlightenment, and physical euphoria in a never-ending quest to transform consciousness. When cocaine was first introduced in Europe, a youthful Sigmund Freud wrote a glowing essay on its benefits. It wards off hunger, sleep, and fatigue, and steels one for intellectual effort. A first dose or even repeated doses produce no compulsive desire. At the Smithsonian Institution, the National Museum of American History houses a collection of advertisements and artifacts from the cocaine epidemic that swept the United States beginning in the 1880s.
The Park Davis Company provided cocaine in about 14 different forms. That's within 1 year.
Author, psychiatrist, historian of medicine, professor at Yale, David Musto.
There were coca cigarettes, cocaine for sniffing, cocaine for eating, cocaine for injecting, cocaine salve, cocaine with atomizers for hay fever, and so on. And you could even get a little cocaine kit with a hypodermic syringe and a needle and vials of cocaine and instructions on how to mix up cocaine for injection or atomizing and so on. Cocaine got cheaper and cheaper as the epidemic went on. It wasn't Coca-Cola until 1900. You might almost say it was the all-American drug. It allowed you to stay up later, work harder, apparently write better, play better, be a better athlete, mountain climber, student. Whatever you wanted to achieve, if you took cocaine, it helped you. We don't want to lose this claim. We were the home of the first cocaine epidemic.
As the century came to a close, America's love affair with the drug was curbed by sobering perceptions. Cocaine induced paranoia, stimulated violent behavior, and was clearly linked to the underworld. Awareness turned the society around.
Cocaine moved from being seen as the most marvelous of drugs, a harmless, wonderful stimulant, to being the most dangerous of drugs.
Cocaine use was criminalized by the Harrison Act of 1914, and following World War I, its use sharply declined.
Part of the national strategy about drugs was to not talk about it anymore. We increased penalties, relied on silence or exaggeration, and in a way that just set us up for another episode.
Societal amnesia helped pave the way for cocaine to reemerge in more powerfully addictive forms beginning in the 1970s.
In the hierarchy of addictive drugs, cocaine would be one of your most addictive drugs. It is a stimulant.
Thomas Costin, psychiatrist and research scientist.
That when you give it to animals and let them self-administer it, they will self-administer it until they die.
With crack, you don't have to use needles. And with the huge surface area of the lungs, it goes directly into the bloodstream and right up to your brain.
Your heart pounds, your whole body starts to race. You can get motor effects, so you get agitated. And that feeling, while some of us might interpret it as terror, if taken with cocaine, is usually interpreted as a tremendously good feeling, something quite exciting. By 20 minutes, a great deal of that experience is gone. They have paranoia, they can have the suicidality. During the binge of using cocaine, they've usually been up steadily for anywhere from 18 to 72 hours without sleeping, without eating, without doing anything except using cocaine.
Cocaine does not discriminate. As the cost falls, it becomes available to all socioeconomic groups and to lower age groups.
Crack cocaine, you can use your lunch money in Fairfield County to buy crack. Some kids do. It's very inexpensive. So the use of cocaine has really moved down in the age range.
Obviously, this is not something that's dealt with by giving people methadone or locking them up in prison or teaching the kind of drug education that we now have in schools. These are much deeper issues that have to do with being human, and they're connected with why people take drugs in the first place.
In diverse cultures the world over, children's play is bound by a common harmony.
You can see very young children spin to produce altered states of consciousness. And they're using a technique, rhythmic motion, which is exploited in many cultures for inducing altered states of consciousness. I think all human beings are addicted. I think that's something that comes with human birth. I don't think this is something that's culturally taught. That seems to be something biological.
Beta endorphin is a natural morphine. You produce beta endorphin in a variety of ways. You produce it during stress. You produce it during vigorous physical exercise.
It's almost like a color organ, in a way that you get a certain combinations of tones that produce a particular range of colors or shades.
As far as we can tell, every time you learn something, every time you experience something, there's in fact a neurochemical alteration that does occur in your brain. In that sense, virtually anything that we would do that we would get pleasure from would be giving us the same type of effect that cocaine would, but quantitatively, it would simply not be of the same magnitude.
People who get caught up in drug abuse are convinced that the experiences that they want come in the drugs. You know, that the joint of marijuana is what makes them high, or the opiate is what relieves pain. It's not that way. The experience is in the brain, it's in the nervous system. The drug provides some kind of a trigger that allows some kind of shift inside. It allows you to shift into another mode of consciousness. But the mode of consciousness was inside you, it wasn't outside you.
For Blake, human consciousness alone possessed unrivaled power, the power of vision and creation.
Though it appears without, it is within, in your imagination.
Consciousness was the sun that cast its light on all external phenomena, a light that illumines, colors, imparts meaning and life. A light cast by the God bound up in the human soul.
The most important thing in any person's life is whether he or she is connected to the infinite. Why does mankind have the instinct to create religions?
Joan Blackmer, former dancer and Jungian analyst.
There's a religious instinct in us. There's something in us that knows that we're not the end-all and be-all of existence.
The religious traditions are the major human attempts to be human, so it's as old as humanity, and as old as...
Diana Eck, professor of comparative religion and Indian studies, Harvard University.
What we call prehistoric grave sites, where people have been somehow carefully buried with a sense that there is more to the human being than what lies there in the grave. You get a sense of a religious perception. The Christian tradition in the West is simply permeated with the consciousness and underlay and ritual forms of the pagan traditions of Europe.
The sacred is in every grain of sand, it's in every leaf of a tree, in every blade of grass. Not something that is separate from us, not something that is beyond, but something that is both beyond and now. Witchcraft and paganism go back much farther in time than Christianity, or for that matter Judaism. Witches were in many ways the shamans or the priestesses and priests of the old pagan religions of Europe. And so the church saw itself in competition with these old religions and focused
Andrus Corbin Arthun, Witch, Earth Spirit Community.
As adversaries. The original witches lived among the rural populations of tribal societies in Western Europe. These were people who were healers, who knew how to set bones, who knew how to suture wounds. They were midwives. They knew how to turn babies in the womb if they were breech. They knew how to stop the mother's bleeding. There were herbalists. The church for a long time had a monopoly on every form of communication in Europe because the only people who were at all educated were Christian educated. This book is called the Malleus Maleficarum, a book that was written by two Dominican friars during the Renaissance, and it's a manual for the Inquisition. This particular volume is bound in human skin, in the skin of someone who gave her life under the accusation of witchcraft, who was killed as a witch. The book has a lot of different chapters that tell the Inquisitor how to identify a witch, what kinds of tortures to employ, and how to protect himself from the power of Satan. It's the one book that perhaps encapsulated how a lot of the negative ideas about witches were cemented in the mind of Western civilization. Even to this day, people retain some of those misconceptions. In fact, witchcraft has nothing whatsoever to do with Satanism or devil worship. Satan is really a Judeo-Christian myth. In altering our consciousness in a reasonably controlled way, we're able to enter psychic states that people seldom reach except in a very random way. It's a sense of being one with the universe. Everything is composed of a certain balance of the four elements. The element of air is the part of ourselves that is least tangible. And that, of course, is our minds. The element of fire implies passion, power. The element of water, when we experience intense emotions like anger or joy, we shed water. It is also associated with the deeper aspects of our minds, with dreams. And finally, the element of earth is associated with solidity, with grounding.
The real perception is that the divine is present in this world, which they take not to be a world simply to be mined and exploited by its human consumers, but a world which has an integrity of its own, a wholeness of its own of which we're a part. Somehow we have, to our great detriment, lost touch with the rhythms and cycles of nature.
People don't like to deal with the unknown. Most religions attempt to present us with a model of the sacred. In some ways, I think a lot of us would say the ultimate arrogance is to believe that we actually know what God is or what lies beyond, because who really can?
In the countryside outside Barre, Massachusetts, the Insight Meditation Society holds silent retreats in a former Catholic monastery.
Meditation is practicing the presence of consciousness. And in the Hindu tradition, that practice is sometimes called by the name of yoga, which means discipline.
After 3 months of silence, this retreat is nearing its conclusion.
I think when most people come here, the thing that they fear more than anything is being silent. It's just unimaginable not to speak for even 2 days, let alone 3 months. But almost uniformly, it's the single most beautiful part of the experience. It's what people refer back to.
Vipassana literally means seeing things clearly. And so that's the whole essence of the path, to see things clearly.
The instructions are very simple. So simple that they may sound simplistic. Be with the breath. Or when you're walking, be with each step. The lifting, the moving, the placing of each step.
Watching the in-breath and the out-breath, the in-breath and the out-breath, perhaps counting them up to 10 and starting over again. It sounds simple. It's extremely difficult.
And what you learn very quickly is that you're not in control. You're an observer of your own stream of consciousness, as it were.
We live our lives in the stories that we create about experience. And so the practice, the meditation, is to come out of the story.
Gradually, the mind becomes a little more steady, a little more clear, focused, and the power of mind grows stronger. From the outside, these figures look very calm, but there may be a total turmoil within each person. It's a journey into self-understanding, discovering just what lies in the human heart and mind. And everything under the sun is there.
Things are not as solid as they appear to be. Not the world outside, not our bodies, not our minds, not our notion of self, of who we are. Man is a concept. What the eye sees is color and form and light and shadow. What we are is the flow of experience itself.
In the Hindu tradition, the teacher says, that whence all beings come, and that which, when born, they live by, and that into which, upon deceasing, they enter. Be desirous of knowing that. And that reality, where we come from, what it is that supports us while we live, and that into which we enter when we die, the knowledge of that reality is really what animates the religious quest. And I think it is a foundationally human quest.
They began as a little group of straggly hermits who lived in caves on the hillside. And their principal goal was to meditate day and night on the law of the Lord, watching in prayer.
From a few Crusader monks in the 12th century on Mount Carmel in ancient Palestine, to the cloistered nuns of St. Teresa of Avila founded in Spain in 1562, to the present, there is an unbroken continuity of contemplative devotion. A Carmelite monastery in Baltimore was founded at Port Tobacco, Maryland in 1790.
Indeed, as the love of Christ lures us into the wilderness, so the love of Christ gathers us together.
We say over and over again to people that we're really hermits, and I think we are.
There's a quote which says, "Be still and know that I am God."
It's in solitude that my spirit, so to speak, is fed, so that the graces that I gain in solitude, I can then take out. It's like a rhythm. We live a rhythm. We go from solitude out into community, and then from community back into solitude.
I think when I was 5 years old, I first knew that I wanted to be a sister.
I had looked at being a teacher, being a nurse, being a social worker, being a missionary, and somehow I realized that in prayer, I could do all of those things.
Some little voice inside of me kept saying, what would happen if you put prayer first?
I think the hardest thing was the pain that it caused my family, my mother in particular.
When I first was going to be a Carmelite, people said to me, "Oh, you're throwing away your life. Why are you in the monastery praying all day? Or why aren't you out doing something that could be constructive for the world?"
In a life, we always choose. I certainly feel capable of being a mother. And it's something that I won't be here. But we make choices, and that puts certain things aside, and it opens up opportunities for other things.
For me, prayer is a relationship with God, and it grows like any relationship. It takes time and space and effort and discipline. It has all the ins and outs and ups and downs of a relationship. But it's that putting God as the first and the center and the core.
When I go into prayer, there are times when I can understand why we're on the brink of war, because I come in touch with my own defensiveness. There are times when I can understand our consumer society, because I come in touch with my own greed. There are times when I can understand why we have problems that we can't solve, because I am not really courageous all the time.
If it's an authentic life, it's a life that leads to conversion of heart. It is a life, therefore, that means looking at yourself and stripping away all the screens that we put up between us and ourselves. That can be hard. I think that's perhaps one of the hardest parts of it, is to stand naked before yourself and before God. It requires courage.
Each one of us is purified by what the mystics call a dark night, by a darkness that is actually a call from God to grow beyond where we are at the present time, the limitations of our human existence, sometimes the failures of our endeavors, the failures of our marriages, the betrayals that we experience. When we experience darkness, it's actually the beginning of a deeper experience of God in our lives, of light.
For some, we love God with the kind of unconditional love that parents have for their children. And others describe it as the kind of companionable love that best friends have for one another, that unflinching loyalty. And others describe it as the love of lovers. Others go so far as to say it's the kind of love that you have for the lover that you're not married to, because married love is condoned by society. But the love of God is riskier than that, and it requires that we risk everything for the love of the beloved.
Let us proclaim the mystery of faith.
It is a life that really bears witness to the primacy of the desire for God that really is in the heart of every person, that's implanted there just because we're human beings.
The insight of the mind and the transformation of the heart are inextricably bound together.
I do believe that through the power of prayer, something affective and effective is happening within the world beyond.
And I think if our world needs anything today, it needs some kind of a witness like this. People who really are concerned about the inner life when so much of our society is concerned about the outer life and what we can acquire and what we can have.
Contemplation really does transform the human person.
It can be mysticism, It is ordinary nonetheless. It is something that everyone can tap into. but it needs to be cultivated. We in this culture don't often do that.
One can grow over a lifetime so close to God that, in fact, one slowly does begin to take on the mind of God, to see this world and these people as God really sees them.
And that one man they call Jesus the Christ, and they in him, and he in them, live in perfect harmony.
Islam. The 5 pillars were revealed to the Prophet Muhammad in the Arabian desert 600 years after the birth of Christ and recorded in the Quran. Now, 1/5 of the world's human beings are Muslim.
There is a sense in the teachings of Muhammad that renunciation of this world is inappropriate. He was not a renouncer. He was not an ascetic. He was married. He lived life in this world. And insofar as Muslims model their life after the life of the Prophet, it is not an ascetic life. It's meant to be a life in this world.
Islam literally means surrender, to lie down in peace before the will of Allah, the one God. But the intent of Islam is to create justice in this world, to unify the temporal and the spiritual.
Sufism is a strand of the Muslim tradition that I guess we would have to call mystical in some ways. It focuses on the paradigm, one might say, of the ascent of the Prophet to heaven, to the very throne of God, the mystical journey of the Prophet, the night journey from Mecca to Medina to Jerusalem, straight to the very feet of heaven. Allah, 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 One of the great Sufi poets, a woman actually named Rabia, says, "If I worship you in order to avoid hell, then cast me into hell. And if I worship you in order to attain paradise, then bar me from paradise. But if I worship you simply in and of yourself, simply for your own sake, then reveal to me the loveliness of your face."
The Prophet has a saying, "Live this life as if you live eternally, and live this life as if you die tomorrow."
Religion as a noun has kind of a thingish quality to it, as if you could draw a circle around it and say, this is what religion is. And it calls to our mind those things that we do on Fridays if we're Muslim, or Saturdays if we're Jewish, or Sundays if we're Christian, as if you could circumscribe them. And when one begins to think about human religious life, there are more and more things that fall into that circle. Dance, music, poetry, all of that falls within the domain of religion. It's hard to say what falls outside of it.
Some people think that dancing doesn't involve the mind, but that isn't true at all. If you're not there, if you don't know what it is you're doing, you can't possibly give of yourself, and that's what performing is all about.
L.V. Moore, General Director of the Washington Ballet.
Giving your entirety to the audience or to whomever is watching the performance. And so both physically and mentally you have to be there, and therefore the discipline has to be there.
Dance is a very primal form of communication. As we evolved into human beings and couldn't communicate, we had to mime, we had to grunt, we had to use, I saw a bear and I hunted. It's something deep-rooted within us. And to see an evening, a story told, or even just the vaguest theme of love or hate or resentment, the fact that you can get that across with no words.
The Washington School of Ballet, founded in 1944, has trained many of America's premier dancers.
And dancing is physical. To some degree, it is mind over matter. In order to overcome your deficiencies, you have to be able to picture yourself doing it right.
Permanent guest artist Kevin McKenzie instructs this class of the Washington Ballet Company.
I spend so many hours a day working with my body and with my mind so that the connection of the physical and the mental will be reachable, touchable, tangible.
Classical ballet technique dictates certain rules, and your job is to play with your body, use your brain to change your body. Yeah, there are very few dumb dancers around.
Because your last whole two pirouettes and you were like, finish the exercise while you were turning.
When you go beyond yourself, you can't think of you personally, of me, and you don't think about whether your checkbook is balanced or whether your laundry has been done or any of those mundane things, or whether we're going to war. Those things somehow disappear because the whole focus is on something beyond yourself.
There's no body-spirit split. They're two paths up the same mountain. As they come up to consciousness, they manifest differently. You're always pushing against your own limits.
Don't lean off of it. Support it. The same?
The difficult, the painful, the conflictual experiences are the growing experiences.
Down.
That brings the spark of light. And it's a very difficult thing because we spend all our lives trying to avoid that kind of discomfort. Too much of it destroys, but without a good bit of it, we stay asleep.
It takes so much to dance. You really, it's got to be almost everything.
Passion. Each individual has his or her own feeling as to why, and after doing it for so long, you grow to love it. It's like something you can't live without.
You can go out on stage and really lose yourself. And you can come off stage and not really know what you've done because you lose yourself in the moment.
hard to explain. Feeling.
Man has no body distinct from his soul, for that called body is a portion of soul discerned by the five senses.
Hidup bagaikan impian, sesuatu yang dimainkan di belakang layar, dan saya sekarang pemimpi, sekarang penari, saya ditarik keluar masuk kehidupan.
The words of Amir Hamza, Indonesian poet. As part of a nationwide festival of Indonesian culture, the Smithsonian Institution features numerous performances and exhibitions at many of its museums. A gamelan orchestra weaves a web connecting poetry and dance. The dances are exquisitely controlled meditations, outward expressions of inner grace and mystic purity. Gestures of ritualistic exactness flow from the dancer to create their own eternal world.
Life is a dream, something played behind the screen. And I now a dreamer, now a dancer, and pulled in and out of existence.
We take great pride in this world of ideas that is much more real to us in many ways than the physical environment that we're living in. For many of us, we just see enough of the world to get from one place to another while we go about our conceptual business. We all hear about how fast computers are and how smart they are, but they're actually only smart at all because they're fast. They're incredibly stupid if you compare them to a 2-year-old. And what they're stupidest at is seeing. So asking the computer to understand your image in a 30th of a second, currently in 2 dimensions, the next step is 3 dimensions, that's asking a lot.
Myron Kruger is known as godfather of artificial reality. Although the brave new world of cyberpunk, virtual reality, hyperkinetic space is currently more dream than actuality, interaction between human and computer is gaining sophistication at a geometric rate. Gestures drawn in the air are perceived by the computer and transformed into responsive graphic images. In the future, humans may wander through self-created artificial worlds, replete with touch, hearing, and smell.
What we have is a new medium of expression and a new medium of experience, where the laws of physics are different, where the relationship of your body to the environment is different, where the rules are not consistent from moment to moment, where reality itself enters the experience as a character. One of the beauties of the human brain is that we can make real things that are not.
The computer understands where my body is in the artificial reality. It understands where the other person is. Now they're going to occupy the same space, and there's going to be contact. Now it has to understand whether that contact was a tap on the shoulder or whether I am trying to knock them over. What is the significance to the storyline, if there is one? Every step of that is not just artificial intelligence, that's artificial genius. If you think about all our art forms now, they're for the neck up. We are physical creatures with bodies, and as much as our educational system and as much as our intellectuals would like to deny it, the mind evolved to serve the body, not the other way around. The interface between man and machine is now a permanent part of the human condition. The computer will understand the person as a physical entity and not as occasional impacts on a keyboard. So you could have the enchanted forest really is enchanted and interacts with you as if it were alive. For the first time in a long time, we could really redefine what imagination might be.
On occasion, as human beings, we have a kind of what is called the aha experience in science, or that moment of realization, or that moment of finally actually impacting with something. And when that happens, I think probably those are the most important moments in our lives.
Robert Irwin, artist, master horse player, teacher, thinker. Born in Los Angeles in 1928. In the 30s and 40s, a city of sun, movies, laid-back living. Irwin became one of the founding members of the Ferris Gallery and an artist of renown. The Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney, the Art Institute, international exhibitions, critical studies. But Robert Irwin is a gambler. He'd made his living playing the horses before fame struck. By 1970, he'd given it all up. The studio, the potential wealth, the making of marketable objects. Robert Irwin had become a man hooked on his own curiosity.
The problem in terms of our society is that we have no way of measuring the quality of a question. We only have ways of measuring the significance of answers. All the work I've done is not like children in the world. I have no umbilical cord connected to any of it. I've become a total question addict. Here's something which piques your curiosity, to get you to look one more time, to go through the process of just saying, wow, what a beautiful place. I don't have an agenda other than to make you aware that you're the magic, that you're the person who perceives, that you're the one who actually has the potential structure, and you are capable of making choices.
At the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, an exhibition features works that raise questions about the nature of human perception. Questions that Robert Irwin posed with the same fervor with which he had painted. Although he would lay no claim, he was simply another artist who'd placed his bet. The art was no more important than the perception of those who viewed it.
Here all of a sudden I see this exhibition. It's suddenly this work, which is about being outside and looking at the world from another point of view, suddenly has found itself compromised in little houses, which is no different than the frame. You have this space, this magic space, and you have a gold leaf frame all the way around it, and it's sitting on a red velvet wall. There is no such thing as an empty room. A highly complex set of surfaces, shapes, colors, light, and so on and so forth, physical dimensions. So I couldn't help but take the temptation in 30 minutes, figure out a piece that to some degree tried to deal with that space as you found it. And also deal with the statement on the wall that it was a light in space. So the piece was an attempt to deal with the quality of light in a place, slightly in a sense played with, quality of space, not as definitions, not as walls. And something which, in a sense, takes into account the problems that are existent in the thing, which is all those wires coming down and what have you. So I'd rather like to be able to do that one. You don't get an opportunity like that very often. To me, that one really kind of called a spade a spade.
Irwin's questions led him to reading philosophy, to 100 universities where he taught by simply being available. For Robert Irwin, art had become as much a state of awareness as something tangible.
When I wake up in the morning, I open my eyes. I'm not astounded by the fact that the world is totally formed, that everything's there in place, then I can just simply get up and proceed to brush my teeth. If I had to lay there for 30 seconds and the world formed slowly, I would realize the magnitude of what's going on. That is that I or we are forming this world. It's not given. It just has the appearance of being given. It's a beautiful idea. The idea that there are real truths, that there are, in a sense, absolutes, that there are, as it were, 10 commandments. On occasion, there are those moments when we find ourselves aware that there is a possibility that something exists outside of what we know. It scares the hell out of us sometimes. We essentially forget the most essential thing, that we perceive, and that this perceptual process is infinitely complex. Our senses begin almost at ground zero, essentially feeding us an incredible amount of information at every moment, which we are not only gathering, but we are ordering and structuring and putting into some kind of action. It really works. So you can't say that's wrong. And yet at the same time, as you build those kinds of structures, you, in a sense, enclose yourself in them. And they become essentially the definitions of your world. They become the definitions of your reality. In our lives as we live them, there are no single truths or absolutes, as desirable as that may be, which is not to deny that it isn't possible, but it's simply to say that we don't know what they are. It strikes me that the great works of art have somehow coincided with this moment of discovery, the individual discovering for themselves, having that real experience of something very special that rises up and opens your eyes and gives you a new possibility of how things might be.
A spirit and a vision are not a cloudy vapor or a nothing. He who does not imagine in stronger and better light than his perishing mortal eye can see, does not imagine at all.
The river of perception seems infinite. Can we alter its course at will? Is there some universal ocean that might be called reality? Does the flow of perception open countless doors onto ever-expanding mysteries?
What really is real? What truly matters? Is it justice? Is it love? Is it awareness? Is it attention? Is it submission to God's will?
Everything that's born will die. Everything that comes into being will pass away, moment by moment by moment. Nothing lasts.
And this ambition to transcend our own death, to transcend our own so-called limitation, we gave away something very, very powerful. We gave away the moment of being in the world, which is in constant motion and in constant action, and is another kind of reality.
The great important thing is to keep conscious And if that energy comes up from the depths, one has to humanize it and contain it.
One realizes how different the earth could really be, the world could be, were more of us touched and transformed.
That kind of attention is all the more needed. That break from the headlong rush from birth to death is absolutely essential for people's day-to-day lives. I think there's a real thirst for spirituality, for spiritual discipline in this culture now.
This world of imagination is infinite and eternal. There exist in that eternal world the permanent realities of everything which we see reflected in nature. It is the divine bosom into which we shall all go after the death of the body.
Smithsonian World's exploration of our unique human experience is made possible by the Communications Company with the products and services that help us share that experience. Southwestern Bell Corporation. This program is also made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Video cassettes of this program for educational use may be purchased by writing to PBS Video. Home video sales are not available through this offer.
This is PBS.
For a free reading list, please call or write the Smithsonian Institution, Washington, D.C. 20560.